Hello, and thank you for tuning into the Progressive Parent YouTube channel. Today I'd just like to tell a couple of anecdotes about freeing children from negative roles they might feel the need to live up to. This first one is from the book How to Talk So Kids Can Learn by Adele, Faber and Elaine Mazlish. I'm a really big fan of their books. I think they're excellent. This says, the following experience shows what can happen when a teacher is determined to see a student in a new light. Daryl Jackson was a large, obnoxious 10-year-old, twice as big as anyone else in my class. Because of his size, you expected him to be more mature, but he behaved like a big, loud, goofy fool. He'd bop other kids on the head, shove them, fling himself around, run into the hall yelling, "Ah!" if he heard someone coming, anything to get attention. If that didn't work, he'd start talking in a loud voice about titties and doo-doo. The kids didn't like him either. He was always putting them down. You didn't know that? You're stupid. On the bus for a school trip, he'd insist on taking up 2 seats for himself. In the lunchroom, he'd gobble his sandwich and stick out his tongue with half-chewed food still on it and laugh. I found myself saying his name over and over again with increasing annoyance. "Daryl, stop it! Daryl, be quiet!" Sometimes I'd physically push him back into his seat. "Daryl, I said sit down!" The underlying message in my voice was, "I don't like you. Your very presence annoys me. You are my irritant." Once I became so exasperated with him, I made a gesture of tearing my hair out. Daryl's eyes lit up with pleasure. With a big grin, he said, "I'm driving you crazy, right, Mrs. Bergen?" He had achieved his goal, and not only with me. Every teacher in school knew his name, and they all hated him. At the lunch table, they'd trade Daryl stories. He had succeeded in making himself famous throughout the school. It was almost funny in a horrible sort of way. He was so disruptive that I considered consulting the guidance counsellor or school psychologist about him. But there was a stubborn little part of me that decided to take him on myself. I knew that if there was going to be any small possibility of Daryl changing, I would have to change my tactics. But I also realised that I couldn't just do it mechanically. I had to find at least one quality in Daryl that I genuinely liked or admired. Without some real feeling for the child, the whole process would be an exercise in manipulation. Maybe that would be better than nothing, but I was hoping for more. The next day I watched Daryl like a hawk. His one saving grace was that he was talented at drawing. He could look at any object and reproduce it accurately. I saw Felix call him over and show him his drawing. Felix has poor hand-eye coordination, and his drawing was barely decipherable. Nevertheless, he pointed to his squiggly lines and told Daryl, "Look, here's the man about to shoot the dinosaur." I thought Daryl would make fun of him, but instead he just smiled and good-naturedly and pointed to the squiggles and said encouraging things like, "Yeah, and here's an alien coming down in a spaceship." That touched me. So Daryl could be sweet, even generous. Maybe it was because he felt so secure in the area of art. From that moment on, I launched my campaign of positivity. I started by choosing Daryl for small tasks like cleaning the chalkboard or putting away the world books in alphabetical order or feeding the turtle and then thanking him for helping me. It turned out that Daryl really liked animals. I put him in charge of the hamsters for a week and told him that the animals seemed to love it when he held them because he was so gentle. He beamed. Then I went to work on helping the other kids in the class see him differently. Whenever someone needed help, I'd say, "Oh, get Daryl to show you how that works. He's good at fractions." Or, "Daryl, you know a lot about animals. What kind of dog would make a good watchdog?" I was hoping they'd think, since the teacher didn't seem as a pest anymore, maybe he wasn't. Whenever I absolutely had to reprimand him, I tried to preface it with something positive. Daryl, I know how hard it is to wait, but Felix needs to finish what he's saying. Or, Daryl, I know it isn't easy to control the urge to get out your seat, but right now I need everyone sitting down and paying attention. After a while, Daryl started saying things like, See, Mrs. Bergen, I'm controlling myself. Or, See, I waited my turn. Or, I wanted to jump, but I didn't. And I'd always respond quickly and warmly. I noticed that. Or, that was hard to do. Then I started writing short notes to his mother. Dear Mrs. Jackson, Daryl has been in charge of our class pets this month and all the animals are clean, well fed and happy. Sincerely, Mrs. Bergen. Daryl loved that. He asked me to tell his other teachers about him now. I was happy to oblige. Mrs. Kramer, Daryl drew a map of the United States and filled in all the states and capitals. From these small changes in my behaviour came large changes in Daryl. He became very affectionate towards me. He stopped annoying, shoving and teasing other kids. He was always jumping up to help someone draw or read or carry. When his new friend Felix had no money for a class trip, Daryl became despondent and later in the week lent him the money. He became a team player. The enemy of everyone became the friend of everyone. He shared a sandwich, candy, anything. He was Mr. Sociability. He was still loud and abrasive, but now those qualities were combined and tempered with socially desirable traits. The other teachers became aware of Daryl's feelings for me and they used it to control his behaviour. They'd say, if you don't stop that, I'll tell Mrs. Bergen, and he'd stop on a dime. He didn't want anything bad about him to get back to me. But in the end, his new behaviour never did carry over to the other teachers. They still didn't like him, and he wasn't going to go out of his way to be cooperative or pleasant with people who treated him like a big nuisance. You couldn't intimidate Daryl into behaving better if he felt you didn't care. You had to appreciate him, to get appreciation from him. So I think this is a really heartwarming story about how much effect we can have on children by casting them in a new light. The important thing I have always found in my own experience is not making people wrong. So in school, if I saw a child trying to distract the class or the teacher by balancing objects on their face or any silly activity that might have been construed as attention-seeking behaviour, I would never make out that what they were doing made them a bad person. I go down to their level and say something like, do you like balancing objects on your face? And whatever they sheepishly reply, I'd say, well, there's nothing wrong with that, but you might want to wait until recess because the other children or the teacher are getting distracted. I really found appealing to children's better nature made them trust me and care for me, and so they were more willing to adapt to my requests out of goodwill. Sometimes when children are perceived as difficult or disruptive, it's because they're playing out a role. Perhaps they're requiring some positive attention, which they rarely get, or they don't know how to be helpful, and they feel like if they try, they'll fail. So it's better to act out than to find ways to cooperate. When I was a counsellor at summer camp, there was one child who was very abrasive and obnoxious for the first couple of weeks. But after a time, he realised he could receive a much better quality of attention and companionship by being kind. And that allowed him to release what I think was his true nature. And he really just wanted to express love for other children and the adults and receive it in return. Perhaps beforehand he was afraid that if he tried he wouldn't receive those things, so perhaps it was better not to try at all. It's really important to work with children to show that they can contribute to the well-being of others and get as much attention and more respect out of doing so. And suggesting ways that children can be helpful is just one way of fostering that. Other ways are describing how you feel or what your preference is without making any reference to the student's character, or offer them a choice of activities. Describe the problem and give some information, and see if you can hash out a solution together. I hope you found this podcast enjoyable and useful. And if you did, please show your appreciation by sharing it on whatever social networking sites you use and with any friends, parents, or teachers that you think might get some value out of it. Thank you very much for listening.